What if one of the most ancient kingdoms in the world had survived? What if the kingdom of Israel had never fallen to the Assyrians, never seen its people scattered, never lost its temple to the fires of conquest? Would Judaism have remained the central spiritual force of the ancient world? Would Christianity or Islam have ever emerged at all? Would Jerusalem, instead of Rome or Constantinople, have become the heart of empire? In this alternate timeline, we explore a world where the ancient kingdom of Israel endures, not as a conquered relic, but as a thriving superpower. A civilization that masters the trade routes of the East, negotiates with Persia, defies Rome, and charts its own path through the centuries. This is not the story of what was. This is the story of what could have been. Let's begin. 722 BCE, in our timeline. The Assyrian Empire descended upon the northern kingdom of Israel with unstoppable force. Cities were razed, people exiled, and 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel were scattered, vanishing into history. The kingdom was no more, its identity swallowed by the tide of conquest. But in this timeline, something changes. Perhaps it is a brilliant military reformer who rises in Samaria, uniting tribal militias into a disciplined standing army. Perhaps Assyria's campaign is distracted by revolts to the east. Or perhaps simply the storm comes late and Israel is ready? Whatever the cause, the result is the same. The kingdom of Israel survives the onslaught. The Assyrian army, bloodied and disoriented, is repelled at Megiddo. Word spreads across the region like fire through dry grass. Israel did not fall. For the first time in generations, a small kingdom has stood up to the great empire of the age and lived. The political shockwaves ripple outward. Neighboring Judea, often at odds with its northern cousin, sees in Israel's survival a chance for cooperation rather than rivalry. The two kingdoms, both born of shared ancestry and worshipping the same God, begin to forge tentative ties. Their mutual enemy has made them allies. The victory transforms Israel's self-image. Once a fractured tribal society, it now sees itself as a chosen people with a divine mission not only to survive, but to lead. The priesthood in Bethel and the prophetic schools begin recording their traditions, laws, and teachings with new urgency. The written word becomes sacred, not just oral tradition, but scripture, and from this moment, history begins to bend. Assyria, humiliated, regroups and turns its attention elsewhere. Babylon, ever watchful, takes note of Israel's unexpected resilience. Egypt, still a power in the south, sends emissaries bearing gold and grain, interested not in conquest, but in commerce. Israel, by accident of survival, becomes a regional player, but surviving is not the same as thriving. The kingdom of Israel now faces choices it had never imagined. With no destruction to galvanize reform, can it modernize from within? Can it balance the ancient tribal loyalties with the emerging needs of a centralized state? Can it forge an identity strong enough to resist both internal collapse and external temptation? For now the people rejoice. The temple in Samaria rings with song. Fields bloom with barley and olive. Families who once feared exile now speak of legacy. The northern tribes, Reuben, Dan, Asher, Naphtali, remain intact. No lost tribes. No erasure, but a great question. Lingers, quiet as smoke over an altar. If Israel had never fallen, what kind of world would rise in its place? Years pass, decades turn. The Assyrians retreat into their own internal wars, and the power vacuum they leave behind becomes fertile ground for new contenders. The kingdom of Israel, once content to guard its borders, now looks outward. Its leaders realize that survival is no longer enough. To remain secure, Israel must become more than a kingdom. It must become a force. The first transformation is economic along the Mediterranean coast. Phoenician cities like Tyre and Sidon thrive on maritime trade. Israel, with its fertile valleys and access to mountain routes, becomes a natural land bridge between the Mediterranean and Mesopotamia. New roads are carved from rock. Watchtowers rise. Caravans bearing spices, linen, copper, and scrolls cross Israel's borders daily. Markets in Samaria swell with wealth and diversity. Israel becomes not just a crossroads, but a broker of cultures. In the capital, a new class of scribes emerges, not only priests, but scholars fluent in multiple tongues. They record treaties, catalog laws, and compile wisdom from Babylon, Egypt, and beyond. The Torah, already sacred, is now joined by legal codes and histories written with purpose and permanence. Israel is becoming literate in a way few ancient kingdoms ever dared, but culture and commerce are not enough to ensure its sovereignty. Israel builds a new army, not tribal levies, but a standing force loyal to the king. Foreign engineers are hired to build fortresses, archers train in formations, chariots rumble along the highways. The kingdom becomes a shielded core in an increasingly fractured region. This power does not go unnoticed. Egypt proposes a non-aggression pact. Babylon sends gifts and spies. Judea, once the smaller southern neighbor, now seeks formal alliance. The two kingdoms, Israel and Judea, enter a new era of cooperation. Religious tensions soften. A joint festival of the Exodus is celebrated across both nations, symbolizing not just their past freedom, but their shared future. Together, they form what historians in this timeline will one day call the Hebrew Liga Confederation of Semitic states, bound not only by language and lineage, but by purpose. With Israel as its economic engine and Judea as its spiritual heart, the League stands as a new player on the world stage. And what of the people? They prosper. Literacy spreads. Women in the northern towns begin to hold positions as property owners and merchants. Children are taught not only oral stories but letters and numbers. The calendar is regulated. Sacred holidays are formalized. Architecture flourishes, homes with courtyards, temples adorned with cedar and gold leaf. A culture once at risk of erasure now radiates confidence, but shadows grow with the light. As Israel's influence rises, so does resentment. In the ruins of Nineveh, Assyrian loyalists whisper of revenge. In Moab and Edom, local kings bristle under the League's expanding trade routes. And within Israel itself, some tribal leaders begin to question the centralization of power. Can a kingdom built on covenant survive the demands of empire? The prophet Micaiah, once a fringe voice, begins warning that pride precedes downfall. His scrolls, full of fire and warning, circulate in secret. The king of Israel, now styling himself as guardian of the tribes, finds himself pulled between vision and legacy. For now, the world watches. Israel has risen, but in doing so, it has entered a new game, one of diplomacy, ambition, and survival. The kingdom has stood. Now it must endure. As the kingdom of Israel matures, so too does its spiritual center. The temple in Samaria, spared from Assyrian flames, begins to rival the grandeur of any religious structure in the ancient world. High walls gleam with white limestone, bronze. Altars burn with offerings day and night. The air is thick with incense and the low, melodic chants of Levites, but this is not a temple of survival, it is a temple of ambition. The priests of Israel, once humble guardians of oral law, now preside over a complex network of scholarship. Scribes and students from across the Hebrew League flock to the temple schools. Here, Torah scrolls are copied not by memory but by ink and method. Law is debated, ethics codified, prophecy preserved. The Mishnah begins to take form not in exile but in glory. A new class emerges, the Torani, a learned elite who serve both court and sanctuary. They are not warriors, yet they wield power. Kings consult them, merchants seek their rulings, foreign dignitaries respect them. These sages begin to shape a society in which wisdom is as valued as strength. Education spreads outward from the temple walls. Villages are encouraged to establish houses of study, precursors to schools. Children memorize psalms, recite commandments, and learn the calendar of festivals. Literacy, once confined to priests and scribes, becomes a mark of citizenship. In this world, to be Hebrew is not only to belong by blood, but by text. But it is not only internal culture that flourishes. Envoys from distant lands arrive bearing questions, not threats. Greek philosophers hear rumors of a monotheistic kingdom, whose laws govern kings as much as commoners. Egyptian priests are intrigued by a people whose God has no image, whose temples are built not to appease but to serve. Zoroastrians, seeking allies against the growing chaos in Mesopotamia, find kinship in Israel's strict moral code, and then something extraordinary happens. The Sumerian temple declares a year of wisdom, a 7-year initiative to gather the knowledge of the known world. Scrolls from Babylon are translated, Indian mathematics are recorded, Phoenician navigation logs are archived. For the first time, Israel becomes not just a religious center but a hub of international learning. A legendary figure emerges, Eliav ben Aharon, a sage who leads expeditions to collect knowledge, not gold. His journeys through Persia, Egypt, and Anatolia are recorded in a growing library beneath the temple. His writings on law, mercy, and justice influence generations. In this timeline, he becomes a name as enduring as Socrates or Confucius, but even golden ages cast long shadows. With prestige comes division. The southern kingdom of Judea, once content with alliance, now fears cultural eclipse. Debates over temple supremacy begin to emerge, quiet at first, then louder. Some in Judea advocate building a second temple of equal splendor. The Hebrew League strains under spiritual rivalry. Internally, voices of dissent stir. Prophets warn that knowledge without humility leads to idolatry of the self. A rift grows between the royal court and the Turani elite, who sometimes oppose the king's decrees on moral grounds. Power, once unified by faith, now fractures under interpretation, and yet the world cannot look away. From Athens to Alexandria, from Babylon to Carthage, the name of Israel is now spoken with respect and curiosity. A people who once wandered. Deserts have become custodians of civilization. The temple age has begun, but can a nation so invested in eternity survive the weight of its own brilliance? By the 3rd century BCE, in this alternate timeline, the kingdom of Israel has become more than a regional power. It is no longer defined by geography alone, but by the spread of its culture, laws, and ideas. It has become an empire not of soldiers, but of scrolls. Trade routes extending from the Red Sea to the Caspian carry not only goods but stories. Hebrew scrolls begin appearing in foreign courts. Merchants quote proverbs to settle disputes. Even enemy generals carry translated excerpts of Israelite battle laws, not out of reverence, but because they work. Where armies once marched, now caravans of scholars travel under the banner of knowledge. The Hebrew League, now fully institutionalized, includes smaller city-states and tribal lands in Canaan, Edom, and even parts of modern-day Syria. These polities are not annexed but voluntarily aligned, seduced not by conquest but by structure. They adopt Israeli calendars, legal codes, and even elements of monotheism. Polytheistic temples continue, but slowly lose influence to community. Halls of teaching and justice. The temple in Samaria no longer stands alone. A network of great learning centers, yeshivot, is established across the region. These centers preserve and replicate texts, debate philosophy, and welcome foreign students. The League's archives rival those of Alexandria. In this timeline, the phrase Torah HaGoyim, the teaching of nations, is born Israelite. Law begins to evolve. The traditional mitzvah expanded with civic regulations on trade, ethics, and international diplomacy. Judges trained in both Torah and civil law adjudicate disputes across cultures. The concept of ger tashav, resident alienees, elevated, granting equal rights to non-Israelites living under League protection. In the far west, Carthage sends ambassadors. In the east, Seleucid princes commission Hebrew legal scholars to reform corrupt provincial courts. Even Rome, rising in strength but not yet dominant, begins referencing Hebrew ideas of covenant, law above kings, and moral restraint. But the greater the influence, the more fragile the balance. Some within the League fear dilution. Conservative factions in Galilee argue against foreign students in yeshivot. Radical voices in Judea call for a return to tribal purity, accusing the capital of selling out to the nations. The monarchy in Samaria, while enjoying prestige, is increasingly forced to act as mediator between the old faith and the new order. One event marks a turning point. In the city of Tyre, a council of sages debates whether to translate the Torah into Greek. Traditionalists argue it will strip the text of divine nuance. Reformers insist it will spread ethical monotheism to the world. After weeks of fasting, the ruling comes, yes, but with commentary. The Megillat Hadric scroll of the Way is born, the first annotated Hebrew scripture in a foreign tongue. This becomes the spark. A new movement emerges, made Derek, Children of the Way. Composed of non-Jews drawn to Israelite philosophy, they live according to Hebrew ethics without full conversion. They spread rapidly through Anatolia, Cyprus, and parts of Greece. A moral revolution begins to take root, not from the sword, but from scrolls. And yet, beneath this flourishing lies a new anxiety. Can a society that conquers by persuasion endure when ideas begin to contradict their origin? Sects multiply. Some reject the temple's authority altogether, arguing that direct communion with God needs no priesthood. Others question the exclusivity of Israelite chosenness. Even among Israelites, generational divides grow between the tribal elders and urban intellectuals. Still, the empire of the scroll endures. It is not an empire of iron and blood. It builds no great walls. It extracts no tribute. It is a network of minds bound by ink, parchment, and principle. But its greatest strength, its openness, may yet become its greatest vulnerability. The seeds of transformation have been planted. Whether they bear unity or division remains to be seen. The centuries roll forward. The old empires, Assyria, Babylon, even the might of Persia fade into history. But the kingdom of Israel endures, not by conquering land, but by commanding loyalty of the mind and soul. Its greatest achievement is paradoxical. In a world of competing pantheons and violent gods, Israel's single, unseen, ethical deity has come to dominate not through fear, but through reverence. The Hebrew League expands not with swords, but by shared law and vision. Across the Levant, East Africa, and parts of Asia Minor, whole communities adopt the festivals, the food laws, the moral codes. Not everyone becomes fully Israelite, but the distinction matters less. To believe in justice, in covenant, in the dignity of the stranger, this is what now defines belonging. In this timeline, Jesus of Nazareth is never crucified because he never preaches. The ferment of religious rebellion that gave rise to Christianity does not exist. The Roman occupation of Judea, so central to the conditions that birthed messianic movements, never occurs. The League remains independent, and the temple stands likewise. In Arabia, centuries later, Muhammad does not receive the Quranic revelations. The tribal world he would have emerged from is already saturated with monotheistic ethics. The Meccan trade routes are governed by League merchants. The Hebrew calendar is observed alongside local customs. A new revolutionary message about God is not needed because that message has already taken hold across the continent. Without Christianity and Islam, the cultural fault lines of our own world never form. There are no crusades, no Inquisition, no Protestant Reformation. Instead, the world is shaped by internal debates within the expanding sphere of Israelite influence. The house of justice versus the house of mercy, the literalists versus the mystics. The scribes versus the prophets. The temple in Samaria remains the spiritual center of this civilization, but its political power wanes. In its place, learning centers rise as new centers of influence, urban academies, rural retreat schools, philosophical forums. Faith evolves, not in opposition to the past, but through interpretation. The Derek, once considered outsiders, become a majority in certain regions. Their syncretic blend of Hebrew law and local culture births new forms of worship, still monotheistic, still ethical, but flavored with the languages and art of dozens of nations. These aren't breakaway religions, but branches of one vast, living tradition. And what of Rome? In this world, Rome does rise, but its character is different. Without the eventual adoption of Christianity, the empire remains pagan for longer, but increasingly influenced by Hebrew law and ethics. Roman senators debate covenantal principles. Latin scrolls quote Ecclesiastes and Proverbs. Some Roman rulers even convert not to Jewish identity, but to Hebrew thought. The fusion of Roman order and Hebrew law produces a hybrid. Cities governed by elected councils that must swear by divine ethics. A judiciary that cites both the 12 tables and the Torah. the Pax Romana remains, but it is guided by the scroll, not the cross. Faith, in this timeline, is not splintered into rival religions. It is unified, layered, ever-evolving. No dogma rules unchallenged, but no prophet rises to tear the world in two. This is the age of theological hegemony, of a single spiritual system adapted across continents. For better or worse, the world has found one God and kept him, but this unity comes with its own dangers, without rivals, who keeps the faithful humble, without persecution, who reminds them of their fragility, without reformers, who ensures that tradition does not become tyranny. The world has avoided holy war, but has it also lost the spark of rebirth? The modern world dawns not with revolutions of blood and fire, but with debates in stone libraries. In this alternate timeline, the age of discovery is not driven by European kingdoms searching for gold or souls to convert, but by scholars seeking lost texts, hidden truths, and the edges of divine order. By the 1500s, the Hebrew League has grown into a loose but stable international confederation. Its influence stretches from the ports of North Africa to the steppes of Central Asia. The temple in Samaria still stands, now preserved more as a sacred museum than a center of ritual. Its inner sanctum houses relics, scrolls, and timeless debates, recorded over millennia. Science and faith are not at war in this world, they are branches of the same tree. Astronomy is studied through the lens of divine geometry. Medicine is guided by principles from Leviticus and Babylonian herbal wisdom. Mathematics flourishes under the influence of scholars from Alexandria Ultima, a university city founded centuries earlier under the Torah's ethos of inquiry. Steam engines are invented not to power conquest, but to automate farming and sanitation. This is a world where innovation arises not from desperation, but from responsibility. But not all is harmony. The rise of new philosophies begins to challenge the ancient order. Rationalism spreads, birthed not in opposition to religion, but in reaction to its rigidity. Young minds question the necessity of ritual. Urban intellectuals speak of covenant beyond the temple, a secular movement that champions ethics without divine authority. It is not heresy, but it shakes the foundation. Some provinces of the League begin to drift. In far-off settlements along the Atlantic coast, merchants and philosophers form their own assemblies, loyal to the League's ideals but rejecting the central calendar and tithe. Debate turns political. Should there be a formal constitution? Should the language of the covenant be rewritten? For the first time in over 1,000 years, the unity of the Hebrew world begins to fray. Global trade brings new tensions. Rival confederacies arise in Africa, the Americas, and the islands of the East. Though many adopt versions of Israelite law, they modify it heavily, creating hybrid systems that sometimes reject core beliefs. Universal covenant becomes a slogan in rival tongues. The center can no longer hold everything together. And then, the unexpected, a movement from within, young, idealistic, radical. They believe the League has betrayed its founding purpose: humility, justice, compassion. They accuse the priest-scholars of hypocrisy. They demand return not to ritual but to revolution. They call themselves Hakol Echad, all is one. They preach not division, not obedience, but synthesis. Unity beyond law. A world no longer led by one tradition but woven from many. Their numbers swell, protests erupt. Old scrolls are rewritten, some cities burn them. Others embrace them. In the twilight of the League's dominance, the question emerges: did Israel succeed too well? For in building a world where one faith guided, all thought they created a world where that faith would one day be questioned by all. We look around at our world where Judaism is a minority, often misunderstood, frequently persecuted. A world shaped by Christianity, Islam, secularism, war, and rebirth. A world where Israel was lost, reborn, and still contested, but in this alternate timeline, Israel never fell, and so the world was never torn apart by rival religions, nor stitched together by uneasy compromises. Instead, it was shaped by one long, slow wave of ethics, of justice, of memory. Would it be better? More peaceful, perhaps. More unified, but maybe also Less human. Because in our world it was suffering, exile, and loss that sharpened the moral imagination. It was destruction that gave rise to prophecy. It was the fall that made the story powerful. Maybe what gives faith its strength is not that it rules, but that it endures. And maybe the kingdom that fell gave the world something greater than survival, hope.